Hey everyone, I'm here to share a lesson activity with you today. So I did an app smashing project recently, and it was where you combined two apps to kind of smash them together to put together a lesson plan and make them flow pretty seamlessly. So the two apps that I chose were Scratch Junior and Flipgrid, and the topic that I focused on was retelling a story. And I didn't choose a specific grade level. I really found that this would work well in kind of just generic elementary ELA. I think it would work well anywhere from 1st grade to 5th grade, and I found standards that kind of align with that. So speaking of which, based on the Tennessee ELA standards, here is 1st through 5th grade, and I kind of picked out a standard for each of the grade levels that I feel really relate to this topic and can be used well using this activity with both of these apps. So in 1st grade we have retell stories, 2nd grade's recount stories, 3rd grade recount stories, 4th grade summarize the text, and then 5th grade summarize the text as well. So really all of these grade levels can be adapted to this lesson activity, and you can make it a little bit more simple or more complex depending on the ability and the age group of your students. So for this activity, I first chose Scratch Junior as my first app. And if you're not familiar with Scratch Junior, it is a coding app in very simple terms, but as you can see here, let me turn on my laser pointer so you can see. So as you can see here, there's all the different coding blocks, and basically this is an iPad app, and when you're on the app you have all these different coding blocks, and you can just drag them down here to the coding sequence. And of course the arrows are pretty self-explanatory. This one makes him go forward, you can make him say something, you can make him stop, etc. And then, so like the cat is usually like the character that you can use, but you can change that or add additional characters such as the dog. And it looks like in this example they've got like an arrow, coded to do different things. Then you can change the background, etc. But basically, in very simple terms, what this app does is you can code characters to animate them, to have them do different actions. So it's basically like a kid-friendly animation app, if that makes sense. So my thought in using this app with the retelling a story standard is that after students read a story, then they would use this app and code their Scratch Junior character to kind of reenact the story. So they would create an animation, they would pick, a background, a character that was represented in this text, etc. And you can even have him, you can't see it in this picture, but you can even have him like say stuff like with speech bubbles and things and have that coded to pop up at certain times. So basically I would just ask students to code the Scratch Junior character and kind of animate the story and like retell the story and summarize the story. So I just think that would be a really fun thing for them to do. So I also have on here how to add content to the Scratch Junior app. If you're not familiar with Scratch Junior at all, I will link this video in the description. I just think that this guy, he does it in 5 minutes. He does a much better job than I could do, and it's very self-explanatory. And if your students aren't familiar with Scratch Junior, even if you are, this would be a great video to show them to kind of get them familiar with the app. And I also like this example too because it's pretty much an example of what I want students to come up with. So this is an example based on the Home Alone movie, so I'll play just a second of it. Let me skip forward. Yeah. So you can kind of see like, how the app works if you're not familiar with it, but I like this example because it kind of gives, I think it would help give students a better idea of what they need to come up with and kind of start to wrap their mind around using this app to summarize a story. So this would be a good example to show them too if you feel like they're just not grasping the concept, or just an example for you to look at so you have a better idea of what kind of activity I'm thinking about. Nope. Okay, and then my second app to use is Flipgrid. So I feel like a lot of educators are pretty familiar with Flipgrid at this point. I started using Flipgrid several years ago. But if you're not familiar with the app, Flipgrid is basically just a video posting app. It's not social media, it's very like education centered. And students can record videos and upload them to the app and kind of have like a little class board of like everyone's videos. So very simple instructions right here. You know, students can enter the flip code. Usually when I use it, because I actually am using it for my classes right now, I just log in with my email address and my name gets connected to the class. But you can enter a flip code or the password, and then you just add a little video response. You record your video, you click next. You know, there's a bunch of different ways you can edit the video and add stuff and filters and stickers and backgrounds, etc. And then they take a little selfie that's like the cover of the video. They can add extra stuff, and then they just post it. So the app itself is like a pretty simple concept. Honestly, I feel like the majority of the work is just on the teacher end to set up the class and, you know, post the topic of what they want the students to do and things like that. But where this app comes into play in the lesson activity is what I would ideally like students to do is after they create their Scratch Junior retelling a story, then I would like them to use Flipgrid to record a video. So there's two ways that this can go. It just depends on what kind of technology access you have access to in your classroom. But I've been in a classroom before where the students had Chromebooks, but then we also had a small set of classroom iPads. So I think it would be so cool if they, because you can't record sound over the Scratch Junior app, unfortunately, so have them create their Scratch Junior animation to retell the story, and then on their Chromebook, and then use the iPad to record their Scratch Junior animation, and verbally, as they're recording the video of the animation, retell the story. So they would, well, to preface, they would write a summary and then they could just read the summary, or if they just wanted to, you know, I say go off the fly, but that's not always the best idea, but preferably write a summary and read their summary to retell it and have it, you know, line up with the animation of their Scratch Junior. So the end result would be a Flipgrid posting of their Scratch Junior animation with them verbally summarizing the story as like a voiceover over their Scratch Junior animation. But I know that's a lot of access to technology, and definitely not everyone has that. So an alternative would just be to have like a second separate activity and have them like kind of use Scratch Junior as the first activity to reinforce the summary, and then the second activity have them write their summary and then verbally either read it or just, you know, verbally kind of like look at it and memorize it, and then verbally record their Flipgrid video and post it to the class. So it could definitely be two separate activities if they just have access to iPads or just have access to Chromebooks. But either way, I think both of these apps still pair really well together in the fact of they're both reinforcing the students having an opportunity to retell the story in their own words. So if you're not familiar with Flipgrid, here's a couple of videos. These are beneficial for the educator, but also if your students are not familiar with Flipgrid, these are both great videos to show them, to kind of introduce them to Flipgrid and show them how to use it. And I will link both of these videos in the description as well. I'm not going to play these. Sorry. Okay. So these are the student instructions that I came up with. So number 1, after reading a short story / book, write a paragraph, 5 to 7 sentences to retell the story in your own words. Make sure the events are properly sequenced. Number 2, once you've written your paragraph, use the Scratch Junior app to code your character to reenact the story. You can access this app on your Chromebook or iPad, but we use our Chromebooks for this app. Again, make sure your events are in the correct sequence to match the story. Number 3, once you have coded your character to reenact the story, you will use Flipgrid to retell your story. On your iPad, you will access the Flipgrid app to video your Scratch Junior video on your Chromebook screen. While you're videoing your Scratch Junior, you will read your story summary aloud. In other words, you will act as the voiceover to your Scratch Junior video. Once the Flipgrid video is complete, enter the title of the Flipgrid as your story you read and submit the video to uploaded. So that is a much more concise summary to kind of everything that I just explained to you, and these are the student instructions that I would provide for them. Finally, just a couple of additional notes I wanted to add. Number one, this activity is assuming that my students have access to both Chromebooks and iPad. I've been in a situation like that before, but I know that's not always the case, so you could definitely alter it to make it work with just one device. Number two, rather than writing lengthy instructions on how to use the app, I found that video explanations to students on how to use each app, and these videos provide much more detailed instructions and visuals. So I think it would just be much more beneficial for my elementary students to watch a video explaining instructions for the app than me listing out instructions when they're using it for the first time. So I highly suggest showing them the videos that I have and that I will link in the description that I have embedded in here, rather than just providing them step-by-step instructions. And then number three, this activity can be used anywhere from 1st through 5th grade elementary. Hopefully you kind of have an idea of how you could alter that to fit the different grade levels, but I think this activity is generic enough, but also flexible enough to where you can use it with any of those grade levels. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Bye.